Atelier Marie Remake, The Alchemist of Salburg, is Koei Tecmo's newest release onto the Nintendo Switch, and a lovely return to the roots of the franchise. And that's because originally, while Western gamers might have thought that Atelier Iris Eternal Mana, which released all the way back in 2007 on the PlayStation 2, was the first Atelier game, they would actually be wrong. It was Atelier Marie, The Alchemist of Salburg, back on the PlayStation 1 in 1997, and later on the Sega Saturn that was the original release. However, this was a Japanese exclusive, and Western gamers didn't get a taste of the early Atelier games until much later, which is a shame. Thankfully, this full-on remake is here to finally amend things. This being more in the original vein of traditional Atelier games, some players might have issues with how the gameplay is actually structured. Time limits are something that newer games in the franchise have steered away from, but the original release, which was something that players were pretty much introduced to, kinda delved deeper into it. Thankfully, this remake has the option to play with typical 5-year limit to finish all the story and all of your tasks, or play without any sort of limitations. So before you even begin your journey, you'll be given a choice on how structurally you can enjoy this title. Story-wise, Marlorn, otherwise known as Marie, is relatively a bad student at the Grand Academy. She's actually doing so bad that her teachers give her a choice: craft a high-ranking item within 5 years to graduate, or you'll be expelled. Given this motivation, Marie finally gets her life together and begins to work at her assigned atelier to get things in motion. While this may sound like a relatively simple story, believe me when I tell you the game does a relatively good job sprinkling actual gameplay plots for you to progress. Although don't expect to get like 15 side quests and a map full of points of interest, which is not really what this game is about. It's more like a slower pace for you to be able to visit certain places, craft materials, and explore a little bit. And that's where I want to begin. Exploring Salburg and the places nearby or around it, and using the rumor system is essentially the best way for you to be able to kind of get the best out of the game. As you begin to speak with more townfolk, more and more details about their daily lives are revealed. In a way, the town itself becomes the center of the story, not just necessarily you. Pick up the occasional side quests as meet up battle-hardened warriors to join your party, and it's pretty much all in a day's work. The more you explore, the more you'll gain and the more you'll discover, and there's more points of interest that will become available to you. But again, depending on the mode that you picked, whether it's the normal or unlimited, you'll have to deal with the passage of time and have some type of limitation. Because gathering, exploring, combat, crafting, alchemy, and just about every other action will take up the usage of time in the normal mode, which is to say, if you're a completionist like me, the 5-year window might not be a lot. Unlimited mode, however, offers the freedom to take your time and make this a cozy experience even more relaxing. As you become friendlier with the locals and more importantly with the warriors that you hire to escort you in certain missions, you'll gain friendship with them, unlocking more and more dialogue sequences, and you get to know them more. They might even end up putting up a request or two to crafting some sort of material to become even friendlier. While Salburg may be the epicenter of the game, exploring the wilds is where most of the gathering and the combat take place. You can actually avoid most of the fights if you desire, since you'll have the freedom to walk around the monsters and pick up whatever it is that you need. However, you'll also notice that some craftable requirements need monster parts, so you might as well engage. Combat has the typical attack, special attack, guard, or block options with items tossed in. It wouldn't be an Atelier game if you weren't crafting bombs or elemental items to abuse the hell out of enemies in many forms. The game is streamlined enough that you'll notice plenty of auto battle features, and depending on how do you want to use, you can certainly disengage some of them. It can make the combat a bit more difficult, but for the most part it's nothing that you have to struggle with. For those coming from like newer Atelier games, you'll know that this is a much more simpler, streamlined experience in that regard, and the same can be said of course about the alchemy. The third major pillar of any Atelier game is the alchemic system and crafting, and don't worry, they didn't forget about it this time around. As you pick up those monster drops and herbs and spices, rocks and dirt, or whatever you come across in your explorations as you gather materials, you'll be required to put those materials in use by crafting items, not just for combat like I mentioned earlier, but also for side quests and even friend requests. You'll spend a fair amount of time using the system, and the good thing is that both fatigue and attribute transfer is not part of this specific release. In newer Atelier games, you have items that become available or specific skills that become transferable to whatever it is that you craft. That's not present here. Fatigue also can set in as you craft too many things too often, but thankfully, again, this game removes that option. What you do have here is a simpler, much more chill crafting system where the main purpose is twofold: success rate and efficiency. Simply put, make sure you don't waste materials and keep your eyes peeled on the success rate of any sort of craft, and use the least amount of materials possible to get the job done. It's pretty simple. To break up the pace, there are randomly scattered mini-games that can occur in certain sequences, but honestly, they kind of feel odd and out of place, kind of like basically stuck in time in that regard, and kind of like do remind me of Atelier Nelke. Basically look up that game if you want to see exactly what I'm saying. It was full of mini-games that didn't necessarily cohere with the entire experience, and they were kind of like their very own thing. One of the sticking points to some players could be the cheapy art style, seeing how the original looked in comparison can be somewhat jarring. The truth of the matter is that to me, I had no actual problem with the look of this game, since in comparison it is a budget release to, for example, the Atelier Rise trilogy. This is clearly a lesser investment from Koei Tecmo, and it shows. Starters, there is no English dub, there's just Japanese audio, which can be a bummer for those looking to hear instead of reading. Then you have the situation that as of the time of this release, there is only a Japanese release and an Asian release that is available in English. There is no official physical release available for here in North America like Best Buy, Amazon, Walmart, Target, whatever, which is bizarre for such a massive company like Koei Tecmo to overlook. So no Western physical release means that they're pretty much treating this as a relatively low budget title. I will say though that performance on the Nintendo Switch is rather excellent. Visually, the game has a nice depth of field and bokeh effects. Everything pops out, especially on the OLED screen, and I can confirm that I did spend some time playing on my Nintendo Switch Lite, and the text reads relatively well. I know that some of you are always asking me regarding the text being too small or too big, especially in a handheld experience, and I can confirm that on the Switch Lite the text is basically readable. That is not a problem that you should be too concerned with. However, there are occasional frame drops in some combat sequences, but they are relatively short and hardly noticeable. Atelier Marie Remake, The Alchemist of Salburg, is a great remake to the original that finally brings this entry to the Western audiences for the very first time, giving players a chill and cozy experience after what almost feels like a bombastic and over-the-top experience in Atelier Rise 3. And believe me, I just finished that game a few weeks ago, and it just felt crazy in comparison, relatively jarring to see how this is what it used to be like and now what Rise ended up becoming. It's just a pretty much drastic comparison. At the same time though, their approach to keep this a budget title does show. It feels like they could have made a much better job, and I'm talking about Koei Tecmo here, in releasing a physical release and of course more importantly providing a Western English dub for those players who don't necessarily want to be able to read subtitles or whatever, or don't want to hear a Japanese audio. Instead, that should have become a relatively simple option to be able to build into the game. Nintendo Sphere gives Atelier Marie Remake, The Alchemist of Salburg on the Nintendo Switch a 7.5 out of 10. And I'd also like to give a quick shout out to Koei Tecmo America for providing me this review copy. If you're brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up, and as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya!